Prime Minister Hun Sen had said that he hopes Myanmar military leader General Min Aung Hlaing will reconsider the death sentence ordered for 2 young men from opposition groups.
On Friday, 10th June, Prime Minister Hun Sen, in his capacity as the 2022 ASEAN chair, sent a letter to Myanmar military leader Senior General Min Aung Hlaing regarding the death sentence. From opposition groups, asking him to reconsider this decision. In the letter sent by the Prime Minister to the Myanmar military leader last week, he said that the planned execution, if indeed carried out, would trigger a very strong and widespread negative reaction from the international community. PBS World News, during a press conference on 8th June, the spokesperson for Myanmar State Administration Council, General Jaw Min Thun, confirmed that 4 prisoners, 2 of whom are politicians, would be sentenced to death. The 4 include ex-NLD MP Zayar Thaw and 88th generation student leader Chaw Min Yu, aka Jimmy, who both had their appeals rejected. In response to a question posed at the press conference on whether people with death sentences will actually be executed, General Jaw Min Thun said, once the death sentence has been passed, they will surely be put to death through the legal process. When, how, and where all depends on the prison manual. There will be steps to transfer prisoners to death row and so on.
I would like to caution listeners that the upcoming interview touches upon various topics that some listeners may find upsetting. In an effort to tell the real story of what is now happening in Myanmar, we encourage our guests to share as they feel comfortable doing, affirming that this platform can bear the weight of their story. As traumatic as the events have obviously been for our guests, they can affect even those of us listening from a distance as well. Every member of our team has shed a tear at some point or another along the process of bringing these interviews to you, and you might similarly find yourself affected by this story. If you feel some of the content may be upsetting, maybe consider listening in stages or whatever way that works. But please do listen to bear witness to this guest story. This is an emergency episode of the Inside Myanmar podcast. Usually the interviews on this program do not exactly cover urgent, time-relevant, newsy events. Usually they are more long-form reflections and taking in people's research or experiences or life story, but this type of interview is very different. And our team has worked very hard to try to complete this interview and complete the episode to get it out as soon as possible. It's not being too dramatic to suggest that interviews like this are literally a matter of life and death. And so we are putting a whatever resources we have into trying to get this information out and cover this in the best way possible. Because as we've seen, this has been one of the top stories that you're about to listen to in Myanmar, in the country, but has not received as much press outside. And so we'd like to add to that what we can. On this episode, my guest is Han Htoo. Listeners might remember him from last year. He did an extensive interview about his background studying economics at Oxford, going on to lead many of the major big strikes across Yangon in the early months, and then eventually having to escape for freedom, leaving the country. And he recently wrote an article in the Diplomat. The link to that article will be in our show notes. This article concerns a recent death sentence that the military regime has handed down, and that is going to be the subject of today's talk. Han Htoo is going to give us extensive details about the circumstances behind this death sentence, the implications of it, the painting a picture of the condemned and those that are connected to them, their family and colleagues, and what this means for the wider democracy movement in Myanmar. And finally, what listeners can do. This is an extremely concerning and disturbing topic. Even after a year and a half of very heavy, difficult news, this still stands out above that. And that's why we want to take the time to urgently talk about this and to raise a red flag to our listeners that this is also something that stands out and people should be aware and concerned about. So with that introduction, Han Htoo, thank you so much for joining us and coming on today to talk about this.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Jua. I am very grateful. Also, the families and all the people who are concerned, also grateful.
So let's take it just at the beginning, what happened. We're going to have some listeners who are somewhat familiar with this case and others who have no idea what we're talking about as yet. So for those that are completely new to this story, can you catch everyone up to speed on what exactly has happened?
Yes, of course. So after the February 2021 coup of Myanmar, the military accelerated arbitrary killings and arrests, and now tens of thousands of people have been arrested, and thousands of people killed, and the matter which we are talking about today is the military decision to proceed with the death sentences of 4 political prisoners who were resisting the military in different ways, in different capacities. Those 4 people are now at a great risk of being hanged at insane prison in Yangon. We in Myanmar have death sentences, but the government does not it have not been literally or really executing these death row inmates since 1989. So it's been over 30 years that these death sentences were never implemented. These essentially means life imprisonment, or if you are on the pardon repeatedly, it will be reduced gradually, and at some point you can get released from the prison. So now this is a different case. So the legal way is the court would make a verdict and hand out the death sentences to the convicted. But the convicted they can appeal for non-execution, appeal for pardon, not from the prison, but from the death sentence, to a higher court. And the higher court would postpone the decision indefinitely, essentially meaning the death sentence is not carried out. So it has been the modus operandi since 1989, but unfortunately, and to our great worries, the appeals of these 4 people were rejected by the court, the military court, not a civilian one. And the military spokesperson, the spokesperson of the State Administration Council, he has confirmed that there will be no pardon, and these 4 inmates would be hanged according to the prison procedures. So with one of my friend, a very good friend who is also a very good friend of Myanmar, we wrote that article in Diplomat, briefing people on the situation and essentially on what it would mean for the other people, for the martyred democracy in Myanmar. And we wrote that article and we circulate within our networks, people we know, and we also write to people we don't know who we believe can make a change. And we ask them to use their freedom to save the lives of these 4 people. So it is true that the military has been killing without any limits since a few days after the coup, but now this is just cold-blooded murder with a facade of a trial, a court proceeding, and this would also heavily impact on the fate of 110 other people who were handed out death sentences, including 2 minors.
That was the question I wanted to follow up, actually. There's a lot of different directions that I want to go with this to understand both the context, the lives of the people that are being that were condemned and those close to them, and the implications overall for the movement. So there's many things I've bookmarked of directions I want to go to give myself and our listeners a proper understanding of this. But one of the things that stands out right away, you alluded to, and this is a military that since the coup has been killing with impunity. They have literally shot and beaten people in broad daylight on the street, children, elderly, monks, some of which have been recorded. There have been ghastly recordings of indiscriminate violence, of police just literally firing at people riding a motorcycle on a nearby road with one doesn't even know why they were doing it. It seems like a completely random act. They have killed, tortured, raped in ethnic villages and cities and night and broad daylight and jail cells. So their practice of these inhumane acts and these atrocities has been ongoing and constant since the beginning. There's no line they've shown they wouldn't cross. And yet this is something that somehow stands above that. So what is the distinction between a state formally, or I don't know if I should call it a state, if that's the right term, because this is not a legally recognized body and they did not take power in an authorized way, but we could say the regime. What is the distinction between a military regime that is murdering with a so-called logical rationale and explanation for why they are taking these acts on and how they're carrying them out? How is that different from the hundreds and thousands that have been murdered and tortured and raped in all kinds of ways before this? Why does this particular death sentence stand out above and beyond the already terrible cruelty that we've already witnessed from them?
Right. So, for one thing, although the state administration council, the military, grabbed the power without any sound legal ground, and also kills people arbitrarily, these are just extrajudicial killings, and and there these could be understand as the collateral damage of the uh, in their words the restoration of law and order, um, and but the difference here, the distinction here, is the use of rule of law, the use of the rule of law and court procedures, these virtues, to to cover these broad daylight murder with cold-blooded. It is the institution which is supposed to bring justice, ironically have been used to murder these people. And also it is about bringing revising a procedure which is very concerning the precedent of the not implementing death sentences has been essentially broken. It is the state uh, denying the rights of the people, um, and 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 it is also not a precedent with grave concerns on the um, people with death sentences, but also people who are now being tried at court, and people who have been handed out imprisonment sentences, prison sentences, and also people who are resisting the military in different ways, as well as people in general. Um, so this is the distinction that I would say: the the use of law to murder people, and the exploitation of people consent, and the love to to foster a culture of fear, an environment of fear that they have been doing since the coup. Um, Also, for some people, a theory is also appealing, but not so much to me. That theory poses that now the state administration council is very desperate for international recognition, uh, and going back to business as usual. So these international institutions and international community include the Western liberal democracies, and China and India, and also the neighboring ASEAN countries. So Aung Hlaing has been denied a dignified legitimacy since the coup, and now some theory suggests that he is now leveraging these, bringing back these the precedent to exploit, to demand, to rob that legitimacy, international legitimacy he's been longing for.
So how does that accomplish that? How does Min Aung Hlaing and the military rulers, how do they benefit from making the appearance that they are going to go ahead with this execution? And because we don't know what mechanisms or strategies they're playing with, we don't know what kind of what their actual plan is, but they're certainly going through with this claim that they will have a death sentence and it will be carried out, and that they've authorized this in ways that, as you've mentioned before, they haven't done that in many years. They've taken a further step that they usually don't. As you've written about and you discussed here, death sentences are often handed out, but they're usually commuted in some way or form. And to date, this has not been. So how, I guess this is a two-part question. First, what do you have a sense of the likelihood of them actually carrying this out, or of just this being part of some larger game? And second, either way, however the strategy does play out, how does it benefit them? How does it bring greater legitimacy to their reign?
Right. I mean, I hate speculation on people's life, and I don't want to say I sense a chance, but here is the thing. Let me answer your two parts of the questions in one go. The military would definitely get a benefit from this threat by fostering fear and self-censorship from the general public and the people who are involved in the resistance movement. This is one way of thinking. This could horribly discourage any resistance movement against the regime, and from the threat they could also expect to have some a formal open request, which they accomplished from the ASEAN. The current chairman of the ASEAN, Prime Minister Hun Sen of Cambodia, he wrote an open letter to General Min Aung Hlaing, asking to reconsider the execution of these 4 political prisoners, and also they could expect some backdoor diplomacy by assuring some a concession from the international community, which has been by and large isolating the regime. So this could be the benefits they could expect from the threat. But if they really proceed, if they really go ahead with the execution, the second benefit would have a reverse effect. The ASEAN may even lose its credibility and the credibility of Cambodia chairmanship approach, which is accommodating and dialogue with the junta. So the ASEAN centrality and credibility might be hugely undermined, and the West democracies, including EU, UK, and United States, which has been pretty much hiding behind ASEAN and just pushing forward that deadlock, 5-point consensus will also be called out. So this would have a reverse effect and huge international backlash from these configurations if they really proceed. But also from the people, they could expect a mixed reaction. For one thing, they could foster fear, but I doubt it. The killings and dying, seeing people who are murdered by the military has been daily news since the first victim. I think people will just become more determined, and politically, any attempt of dialogue and ceasefire or negotiated pathway out from this deadlock situation would have much lesser chance than it is now. So I don't really know the chance. We have rumors of all kinds, which are even not true, but until now it is not happening. I doubt. I just wish that I will never hear the bad news.
Let's take a moment to understand those 4 that have been condemned. Can you tell us a bit about these 4 individuals, 2 of whom are quite famous and well known in Myanmar?
Right. 2 of whom are quite famous and well known in Myanmar, Kojimi and Zayar Thaw. Kojimi has been a prominent student activist since 1988 uprising, and he was a university student back then at Yangon University. He led student organizations, student unions, and he went to the prison from 1988 to mid 1990s, and in 2007 he also led the Saffron Revolution of Myanmar, where monks protested against the then ruling junta, and he was arrested for his involvement in the resistance, and he was released in 2012. So he is now in his 50s. So this is about him. And Zayar Thaw, who is also known as Zayar Thaw, is he used to be a rapper. He's still a rapper. He introduced hip hop to Myanmar. His band called Beginning Acid launched their first album, The Beginning, in 2000, in the year of 2000, and then in 2007 he was involved in the 2007 Saffron Revolution, and he was arrested in 2008 and released from the prison in 2011, and he joined the NLD party, National League for Democracy, the party of Aung San Suu Kyi, and he ran for the election and won the seat he was running for, and he became a member of parliament. He also ran the second term from 2015 to 20, and now he's arrested after the coup because of his role in the resistance movement. And the other two, Lam Yo Aung and Aung Htoo, are largely unknown in Myanmar. They were arrested last year. The military accused them of murder of a school teacher. The military accused them. They stabbed the school teacher with a knife, but they were people from the resistance movement. These were not normal criminal prisoners, but political prisoners. So this is a background about these 4 people.
Right. And what have they been accused of? Have they been accused of separate crimes, or have they been grouped together in something in some similar thread?
Right. The latter two, Lam Yo Aung and Aung Htoo, they were arrested for the same case. They were arrested at different points, but they were accused of the same case. But for Kojimi and Kuziador, they were also accused of planning and leading armed resistance in Yangon, and they were arrested at different points and separate cases but connected.
Right, I see. And how has the legal proceedings of the case gone on? What kind of evidence have they presented? What commentary would you have on them receiving or not receiving a fair trial? How has the legal proceedings developed in this case up till now?
Yeah, so their right to justice, their right to defend themselves in the face of the law are totally denied. I listened to Kuziador's fiance's interview, and she confirmed that Kuziador didn't get to see his lawyer or talk to anyone he knows from outside of the prison, and it is the trial itself. The court is not even a civilian court led by a civilian judge, but a military court chaired by active serving military officers, and we know almost nothing about how the proceeding went and whether they have the chance to defend themselves properly, whether they for sure they couldn't bring any human or non-human evidence to defend themselves. They didn't they couldn't hire lawyers, so it is just a facade trial to murder people in the name of the law.
So you reference an interview that was done with Zayar Thaw's fiance, Matazen. This appeared on our Burmese language podcast. This is called Myanmar Revolutionary Tales. So Any listeners that speak Burmese are encouraged to go to episode 7 of Myanmar Revolutionary Tales, which is available now on all different podcast apps. You can find that, and you can hear the extensive interview that our host of this channel was able to do with the fiance, and learn more circumstances about the nature of the arrest, about the process of receiving the sentence, and also just how she's holding up and how she's feeling. I know that you, Han Htoo, have listened to this interview before we've talked. For those listeners that do not speak Burmese, can you sum up what your overall feeling was in listening to her express herself about the situation?
Right. She talked about the situation and how the military denied any legal rights of these poor people, and she also talked about how they plan to marry in 2021, but all their plans were cancelled. They plan to launch their duet album, a hip hop album. She herself is also a rapper, and all these plans were cancelled, and she became involved in the resistance together with Zayar Thaw in the aftermath of the coup, and how they their conviction, their determination were confirmed after the death of the first victim of the military coup in late February last year. So and Zayar Thaw was arrested, and she also had to escape from the military. She was so desperate and helpless. The military, the threat of the military prosecution also filter out her relatives and her close friends by self-censoring them to offer any help for medicine, and she expressed her grave concern. She said, "I didn't even know how he looked like. Now I don't even know." She said, Zayar Thaw is still having his all organs, body parts working properly. Has he lost weight? She didn't know that. So it is quite a depressing situation, and at the same time, I was moved by her calmness, determination, and the ability to control herself and make an appeal to all people inside Myanmar, also people from all over the world, to use their freedom to save the life of 4 people, including her fiance. I respect medicine greatly, and I wish people could hear her appeal to pressure the government to stop killing those people.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to that area next. Mathazin, the fiance of one of the condemned, has made on our Burmese language channel. She very resolute, very strong and calm, as you say. She sent out an appeal for everyone in the country and out of the country to do what they can to stop this from happening. There are not just these lives at stake of these four, but the precedent of what this sets going forward. It's just another line in the sand that the military continues to cross and to check what the consequences are, and seeing that the consequences are not great, it gives them greater ability to act with impunity on further horrendous acts. And so the fiance is calling for those to stand up and do what they can. Let's follow up on that point. What has been the response of the international community to this recent news?
Right. The international community, the embassies of Western liberal democracies, Western countries, including United States, EU countries, Canada, they made statement about their consent over the imminent execution of these four people, and they pressure the military with these statements. This is what they do as far as we can observe. And this week, Prime Minister Hun Sen, I believe it was last week, not this week. Prime Minister Hun Sen of Cambodia, as I told you before, he, as the chairman of the ASEAN, the regional bloc, he wrote an open letter to General Main Line of the SAC to reconsider the execution of anti-SAC individuals. So this is an encouraging step, because ASEAN traditionally embrace the policy of non-interference and neutrality. So the ASEAN has been a bit banning that norm over the last year to isolate Myanmar and apply pressure on the junta, but still it still needs some more works and more decisive standing to really pressure the junta. So these are the reactions that we are seeing now, and it is largely the same to how they how the international responded to the earlier atrocities of Myanmar military, which were proven repeatedly and productive. So I'm afraid this would be the case now.
I guess one question I have with ASEAN is how much do you feel their stance has just been kind of covering their own behinds, just saying, expressing serious concerns and pushing for a reevaluation just so they look good, so they have that on the record. And then whatever happens, they could say, well, look, we tried, and it's really just to cover themselves. To what extent do you think that they truly are concerned about the consequences of this being a new stage in the brutality and the atrocity that they're seeing in Myanmar, and truly wanting to bring something to bear to be able to leverage and to not have them carry this out? And the second part of that question is, should the military not listen to their grave concerns? Are they suggesting, or do you see further steps that ASEAN can take that would actually have some teeth? Or are they not really going to go beyond just issuing grave concerns, in your opinion?
Right. So, for the first part of your question, I don't think ASEAN doesn't have any interest in not executing these 4 people. ASEAN has been engaging with the junta against the will of the majority of Myanmar people um, um, in the aftermath of the coup. In April last year, May Aung went to Jakarta to agree that he would implement 5-point consensus of the ASEAN, which include immediate a halt of all violences, and dialogue with all relevant parties, accepting the humanitarian aid from the ASEAN through the AHA Center, which is the humanitarian branch of the ASEAN, and also to implement a visit of the ASEAN special envoy to Myanmar, which is essentially the foreign minister of the chairing a country of any particular year. So this regime 5-point consensus is largely backed by China, by India, by the United States, Canada, and the consensus. It enjoyed the very broad support from the unlikely diverse countries with different ideal points. So we can say that these countries, the Western democracies, are staying passively behind that ASEAN consensus. Now, this year, 1 year after the agreement, the 5-point consensus has not been realized yet. So people are now questioning the ASEAN centrality in handling in international response to the crisis in Myanmar, and ASEAN is now bleeding a credibility in that front. Myanmar has been a pain lately for ASEAN. So this is ASEAN interest, fathering with these atrocities, not only these execution in particular, but this is a huge individual case with super important relevance. So this could undermine ASEAN centrality furthermore in Myanmar response, in international community's response. But they didn't include any implication or threat they would carry out should the military doesn't conform, which could essentially mean the temporary the pause, the resignation, the kicking out of Myanmar from the grouping, the ASEAN itself, or applying more pressure and applying economic sanctions, which the military, which is so much very important for military after the sanctions regimes of the Western countries. So these are the threats they can use, but they didn't signal any of those. And for the military, this statement could still be regarded as a toothless one, like the other efforts of ASEAN since day one.
Right. So certainly you laid out a roadmap of what ASEAN can actually do should they find the backbone to do it, of having sanctions or even taking an extreme step of kicking them out. Of course, this is complicated by the fact that many of these Southeast Asian countries and some of the strong world leaders that run them are not exactly known as bastion of human rights. And so it's they might not go as far as what we've seen in the last year and a half of the military trying to reinsert their rule, but there's definitely something of a complication and hypocrisy of the problems that are existing within their own country and the discomfort of this rather rogue agent in the Myanmar military that's just perhaps a more extreme version of the more civilized way that they're trying to present themselves. And so I wonder what your thoughts are about where some of these other Southeast Asian rulers and the ASEAN Council, where they sit at evaluating the criticisms of their own rule in their country, but then seeing a more extreme version of that in Myanmar and just the discomfort or the awkwardness and how they manage a response of something that's gone too far while at the same time not cleaning their own backyards.
Right. You're right. Also, what concerns ASEAN and what they want is the regional stability and the absence of security threat and illicit trade, like drug or human trafficking, which sometimes follow armed resistance, the armed conflicts inside national borders, which transcend these. So the symbolically, of course, the ASEAN would suggest the immediate cessation of these violences and human rights violation. But like you said, this is what they do to a lesser extent and in a more nuanced or smart way in their own countries. But what they really concern is not the atrocities, I would say, just the stability and a source of the regional security threat. So the execution doesn't really fit into that picture directly, but of course it will instigate more resentment from the resistance, which could further escalate the conflict.
That's right, and that connects back to an earlier thing you were saying that I bookmarked to come back to. You were mentioning that this could very well create fear in the hearts of other activists who are not who can be accused of anything at any time and just taken away by an apparatus of the state with impunity. That, as we see with this, if they're able to get away with it, and this would immediately put everyone else at risk, although it has to be acknowledged everyone is already at risk in the country. Anyone who, from any background, participating or not participating in anything, there's no safety with what the military has been doing. But on the other hand, one of the things I was also thinking was one of the things that's really impressed me with this current revolution, and I think stands apart from what we've seen at other times of attempted revolution or resistance, is just this lack of fear. And of course, people have fear. It's everyone has a sense of fear in these situations, but perhaps it's not the absence of it, but it's the overcoming of it. And we've seen terrible, terrible brutality in the last year and a half. And very often when especially on this platform, the guests that I interview, they point to some of the worst atrocities as not creating fear, but creating further motivation, as driving a further wedge into people that maybe weren't engaged and now they're engaged, or maybe even had some mild support of the military and then had to withdraw that after something that happened. And so one of the things I find interesting and perhaps even a bit encouraging is this sense that that these previous brutal actions, which were really just to cut off a few heads and have everyone else cower in fear that they just don't want that to happen to them, that's not really created that kind of response. Their most brutal actions and most humane actions, especially with social media and the way things are shared there now, it's actually had the opposite effect of what we've seen at other times, that it has further motivated people and further inspired them and angered them and unified them and set them, and people that were on the fence or just not involved for various reasons have chosen to engage. And this is all coming, this is not a scientific or comprehensive study. This is a sense that's coming from the hundreds of hours of interviews I've done, where consistently guests have talked about, after certain things have happened that have been crackdowns by the military, the democracy movement has actually been strengthened as opposed to previous times. And so I wonder about that as well. I can certainly see many people having quite a big fear that this could happen to anyone at any time now. It's just another way of death, of all the death and destruction they've already wrought on the people in the country. But already we've seen, just from the time the verdict was announced, there has been a tremendous anger and activism in and outside the country at this kind of new line in the sand that they're crossing. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you in saying that should if the military is expecting fear, it could be their action would be counterproductive and produce more determination. But fear, I mean, from the general public, from the loved ones of the people who are in the resistance, by the military, signaling that they don't really have any limit or sand, the line in the sand. Say they will just do what they want to do to oppress this and the consequence. And for the part of the resistance, it is true that there are so many fearless people in Myanmar who were proven themselves heroes, champions of the country's cause for democracy. But at the same time, it is about human lives. Their risk calculations have to be more careful. They have to be less. They have much less space to operate in. But at the same time, we can expect more resentment and more determined minds and retaliation on different fronts. I mean, we can look at these the decline of the street protests of millions of people after they started shooting people and killing them arbitrarily. These physical protest has been symbolic. They have been so small that they are important only in symbolic senses. It is not about fear, but we're talking about human life, right? And people are still supporting and involving directly, indirectly, in the in the in the resistance to topple the military rule and kick them out and bring justice. Um, but at the same time, we could expect a mixed reaction of um, average people who are just living their lives, uh, some self-censorship from them, and retaliation from the people, and more resentment from the resistance.
Mm-hmm. Let's move into the international community beyond ASEAN, the Western liberal democracies, as you referenced when I first asked this question, that there has been a predictable response of dismay and condemnation of this by many of these Western countries, which we all would have expected, and it's been they've been quite furious at this, but beyond their furious statements, and I don't know what even threats they can make now. What do some of these Western countries that have protested this and have condemned in the strongest possible terms, can they do anything beyond simply just another statement that is expressing shock and horror and asking them to not go through with this? Do they have a greater role they can play in being able to stop these planned executions take place?
It is not about the threat. I think apart from these sanctions and these statements, there's little thing they can do. They can of course pressure the ASEAN and take responsibility for engaging with the military, and take the responsibility for the failure of the 5-point consensus, which that pressure could be passed on to the military from the ASEAN, but rather than threat that they can signal or really carry out, if should the this is another way of looking at it. Should the military really carries on and proceed with the execution, I think the normalization and gaining legitimacy internationally would be much more difficult. The military could expect that, and it is also difficult. It would also be difficult for these democratic countries to normalize with the and to and intendedly carries on support the military effort to bring people to business as usual, but also what they can threat. It just came to my mind. I'm not sure about the political implications and the extent of the threat. They can use the threat of severing diplomatic ties, or or recalling their ambassadors, and just have some consular officers in Myanmar. This is the one they can do, but of course they can do it, but I'm not sure they would use that threat in our case now.
Right. Is there a date for when the execution is supposed to take place?
We hear things, but these are not official, and these are just rumors. It is not worthy of any media coverage. So we had dates, but the military doesn't give a date, and they just said there will be no pardon, and the prison authority can proceed with what they have to do. But a few days ago, the prison authority told to Radio Free Asia Myanmar edition that they haven't received the final protocol to really execute. So this is what we hear.
Mm-hmm. I want to take just a moment and go back to two of the primary individuals who were condemned, and because their lifetime of activism and work really stands out, and I think they're a representative by the virtue of the work they've done. It's not just their own individual lives that we examine, but also how they are representative for wider social movements that are taking place in very different ways. So if we look first at Zayar Thaw, as you mentioned, he started as a hip-hop artist. He actually brought hip-hop into Myanmar. He's credited with that. There's the whole Generation Wave and Rock the Vote. The intro to this episode is a song that is by Matazin, his fiancée, so who's also a rapper. So we featured her rapping to start this episode. And then he later became a legislator himself, so had this very interesting, non-conventional path. But what I want to just spend a moment looking at is hip-hop, is the role of hip-hop in resistance. Of course, hip-hop came about as a medium of resistance. It in the Black ghettos in America, especially, it was describing and depicting a kind of life that much of white America didn't understand and didn't really care to know or even believe. And it was really a tool of resistance and of fighting oppression and of shining a light into the kinds of things that were happening. And hip hop roots have been like that everywhere around the world. It's been used in these kind of powerful ways. What can you tell us about how, when hip hop came to Myanmar, how, especially with Zayar Thaw, who is one of the condemned here, so he played an active role in this, how hip hop became this active tool of speaking out against repression, against oppression, against supporting the resistance in all kinds and tolerance and a more equitable society. What can we understand of the role that hip-hop has played in 20 years in resisting the military, and Zayar Thaw and Matazin's role in employing hip-hop for those purposes, going into the start of the coup, and how hip-hop has continued to be a very important and relevant art form now as well?
Right. So they introduced hip hop to Myanmar with their first album, and hip hop became a representation of the rupture from the total isolation of the country back in those military rule days, and it represents difference, it represents change, it represents youth, and and quickly it became a used as a medium by people to change, to influence the way people think, to represent about the wrongs, the problematic aspects of the society, including the government, the society, patriarchy, and hip hop became a new symbol of a new representation of change and rapture in Myanmar. So Zayar Thaw also personally made songs about democracy, his vision of a new Myanmar that he liked to see, and revealing, uncovering the unspoken aspects, the political taboos that the military didn't want to hear. Right. So the military didn't want to hear. So this is the how hip hop is perceived in Myanmar, and yeah, and how they introduce that culture in Myanmar.
That's great. Thanks for telling us that. And looking at the other prominent activist, Ko Jimmy, whereas with Zayar Thaw, we look at the role of hip hop and a tool of importing hip hop into and using it relevantly and locally within the Myanmar culture. We now, as we turn to Ko Jimmy, we see someone who links 1988, perhaps 2007, I'm not sure about that, and certainly 2022. And so within one life of an individual, we see a series of resistance movements that he has institutional history of, that he has been involved on the inside out and through with his attempts to try to bring more democracy and freedom to Myanmar despite this military regime. And so in examining his life, it also comes to light that he is representing this multi-generational and multi-decade striving towards trying to create a better country. It's not someone like many Gen Z who came of age during this current protest movement, this current in the advent of the coup, but this is someone whose life has really been characterized and marked by his attempts to create a better country in spite of this military rule. And so, how is that important or significant in him, in Ko Jimmy, being targeted in this way? Obviously, these are not random people they're going after. These are symbols. These are people that stand for something, and they don't want only to possibly execute the person, but they're hoping that their message and what they stand for will also will also be affected, will also be impacted beyond just the person. So we have to look not just at the people, but what they stand for and why they're considered so dangerous. And you've explained that with Zayar Thaw with hip hop. As we look at Ko Jimmy with his lifetime of activism, what does this represent? What in his life, what themes or elements do we see of what he's carried and done for Myanmar, and why is that something that the military is wanting to put an end to and feels threatened by?
Right. So I would say just the precedent thing came to my mind, and also it is about erasing the memory, and denying the mere existence of difference. I think their actions symbolize that. And for Kujimi, like you said, a lifetime of activism and sacrifice. And this is the military is now preaching. This is what to expect. What you do, what he do, what he does. So it is about a grave precedent and the values that Kujimi represent: freedom, democracy, and a new Myanmar. They effectively, symbolically deny all of these, and here is a message for the international community. This is the insult in the face of the efforts led by the ASEAN to have a dialogue, which essentially means listening to the difference and sit down and talk about the differences and make a mutually acceptable set of decisions over how to proceed with the new Myanmar. Now this is another yet example of the denial, not also of the dreams of millions in Myanmar, but also the mediation and the approach. It is an insult to the international community. This represent that.
Right. Right. At this point, in hearing how devastating this news is and the grave implications for it, and even some of the big actors and what they're trying to do, and not even knowing what kind of influence they have, I guess the question comes for those of us listening in places of safety. You're someone, Han Htoo, who's very closely involved in this whole case, the families, the colleagues, the process. You've written an article in the Diplomat. Is there something that regular people can do that would mean anything? Is there something that listeners that have gotten to this point and are equally concerned and disturbed by the news being shared, is there any action, any small action that those people listening can do that would matter at this time to try to call attention to it, or even to possibly have an effect of intervening in the execution and the lives of these individuals?
Right. So I can say that first, please spread the word, and second, pressure the people who are in a position to make a real change. Your government representatives, or even the ASEAN, if you can write, pressuring them and bringing the case to their attention to use their power to stop the atrocities and save the lives of 4 people, and halt the military's attempt to establish that grave precedent. This is what they can do: spread the word and reach out to your representatives and other governments who have the power to make any real change.
Right. Thank you. And our platform inside Myanmar, compared to some of these greater, larger media entities, we're a very humble platform. We're just trying to bring attention in English to better understand the events and the going on in Myanmar, especially since the coup. It's been concerning that there has not been a lot of media attention or press outside of Myanmar on this, as one would expect, hence your article in the Diplomat. And so that's also why we wanted to urgently take on this project when you came to us, and to be able to spend the time and space to understand this in depth, because for non-Burmese speakers, there's not a lot of places that you can go to learn more and be updated about what's happening, the context of it, the individuals involved, the implications. And that's why it's so important to be able to use our space and our platform, however humble it is, to be able to take this on and explore it at a greater depth and get that word out to a greater extent. And so that's what we're doing now. But for those that have now listened to this, it's in your hands. So if you are able to bring others to listen to this, or to be concerned and understand what's happening, or if there are any local officials that in your respective places and homes that you're able to write to get the word out, this really is a moment not just of passive listening and feeling sorry for the events unfolding, but in seeing is there anything that can call the attention of a group of people in other places to be able to put more pressure and more concern and spread more awareness that this is above and beyond, as you have explained, this is above and beyond some of the terrible cruelty that we've already witnessed. And I think there could be a sense of just a numb down of like, oh, one terrible thing after another, and one awful event followed by an equally or even worse awful event. And so there could be kind of a numbing of like, oh yeah, it's just things are so bad there that are happening. But this is a departure from what we've seen, and should it proceed as the regime is claiming, and should more sentences be handed down, this is an extremely disturbing development that as much as possible one wants to stay ahead of and see if pressure can be placed.
So I agree with you, and I just like to add, use your freedom and right you have to change, to make a change, to save the life of these 4 people, and please spread the word. I believe anyone counts in this fight. Any effort, no matter how small they would be, writing a letter, making a campaign, posting about the news on your social media. Please do anything that you can to save the life of 4 champions of democracy and human rights.
Yeah, thank you for that. Those are important words to keep in mind. And I really just thank you for taking the time to come on and talk about this. You've been in an interesting position of giving us all of this range of technical information, the recent history, the current developments. You're close with the colleagues and the family as well. You've written the article. So you're wearing a lot of hats, and you've been this kind of resource person for providing and giving us this information. But you're also a human, and you are affected by this as anyone would be by something that's so emotional and so terrible. And so maybe we can just end with checking in with you and how you felt during this interview, how the process has been for you to be playing such a critical role in such a dark case with such terrifying implications. How have you been, and what was it like taking the time to discuss the range of things we covered in this interview?
Right. So to respond to your question, I would just say um, I wish I could talk more about the case to you, and in a more energized way, with, of course, better, with more energy, and in a clear um, statement, more powerful way, if I ever can to do this. But the thing is, as you can see, you can hear the way how I speak. I I am these days very distracted and distressed by the new by the development of the entire thing. Um, I wish I just could do better with the podcast. Um, I, I I don't know. I I'm afraid they something happened to them. Um, uh, they would be hung or whatever uh, while I am sleeping. Um, and I think about what's on their mind wearing these orange inmates uniform, who those only um, who are finally be getting executed get to wear in their solitary confinement. I don't know I think about what they are thinking, how they are feeling. Also, my mind is my thoughts are constantly with their immediate families. Um, I this is so much for me to handle. This is what I can say.
Right. Thanks for saying that. And I think that's really important because we have gone over such a broad range in this interview of talking about the profiles of the condemned, the current state of the coup in the revolution, the response of large international bodies like ASEAN and Western countries, looking at the implications of what would happen should this be carried out, the possibilities of preventing this. And I think that was all very necessary to spend that time really properly understanding this from as many angles as possible in the time that we have. But there is this human element that these are lives of good people that are at stake. And these are lives, brilliant lives that have done so much to improve the world around them. And not only are these lives being impacted, but everyone that is connected to them, everyone that's connected to the case, they are also having this emotional toll of how they eat and how they sleep and how they think and their emotions and their mental processes and their livelihoods and everything else, that this is having this incredible and awful human impact on those that are close. I think it's really important that we end with acknowledging the humanity of it. These are not, we have to talk about the broad arcs of the story. We have to understand the context and the frames of what is happening, but that understanding should not preclude also being able to humanize and identify as a fellow being on this world, just the pain and the burden of carrying this for everyone involved, whether it's you and the work you're doing, or the condemned themselves, or their families, or anyone else. That this is just a terrible anxiety that I can't even begin to imagine, properly understand, that one also has to live under, while simultaneously trying to pay attention to and give awareness to these greater narrative arcs, to simply understand what's happening and to spread that awareness. But these are two things that we have to be concerned with.
So you're right. Thinking about these people, connecting with them, make the case personal to you. this is such a great opportunity that I can talk about these things, not only in a factual report, but these thoughts, these feelings, sharing these emotional distress. I hope these really connect the poor souls to the listeners. I am very grateful that I'm invited today. Thank you very much.
Many listeners know that in addition to running these podcast episodes, we also run a nonprofit, Better Burma, which carries out humanitarian projects across Myanmar. While we regularly post about current needs and proposals from groups on the ground, we also handle emergency requests, often in matters that are quite literally life or death. When those urgent requests come in, we have no time to conduct targeted fundraisers, as these funds are often needed within hours. So please consider helping us maintain this emergency fund. We want to stress that literally any amount that you give allows us to respond more flexibly and effectively when disaster strikes. If you would like to join in our mission to support those in Myanmar who are being impacted by the military coup, we welcome your contribution in any form, currency, or transfer method. Your donation will go to support a wide range of humanitarian missions, aiding those local communities who need it most. Donations are directed to such causes as the Civil Disobedience Movement, CDM, families of deceased victims, internally displaced person, IDP camps, food for impoverished communities, military defection campaigns, undercover journalists, monasteries and nunneries, education initiatives, the purchasing of protective equipment and medical supplies, COVID relief, and much more. We also make sure that our donation fund supports a diverse range of religious and ethnic groups across the country. We invite you to visit our website to learn more about past projects as well as upcoming needs. You can give a general donation or earmark your contribution for a specific activity or project you would like to support, perhaps even something you heard about in this very episode. All of this humanitarian aid work is carried out by our nonprofit mission, Better Burma. Any donation you give on our Insight Myanmar website is directed towards this fund. Alternatively, you can also visit the Better Burma website, betterburma.org. That's BETTERBURMA.org, and donate directly there. In either case, your donation goes to the same cause, and both websites accept credit cards. You can also give via PayPal by going to paypal.me/betterburma. Additionally, we take donations through Patreon, Venmo, GoFundMe, and Cash App. Simply search Better Burma on each platform and you'll find our account. You can also visit either the Insight Myanmar or Better Burma websites for specific links to those respective accounts, or email us at info@betterburma.org. If you'd like to give it another way, please contact us. Thank you so much for your kind consideration and support.